I have been reading a new book, partly written by John Grisham and partly written by Jim McCloskey, who is an extraordinary man involved with Centurion Ministries, which has been working for 4 decades to try and get wrongfully imprisoned prisoners out of American jails. And Jim's memoir, When Truth Is All You Have, was published about 4 years ago and is one of the most inspiring books that I have read. And what a thrill and what a privilege to have one of the authors, John Grisham, with us now via Zoom. Hello, John.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm in decent health, and yourself?
In really good health. Happy for good health.
It was clear from the very early fiction books of yours that you had serious problems with the fallibilities of the American justice system. And then in 2010, I think it was, you wrote the book The Innocent Man, Murder and Justice in a Small Town, about Ron Williamson sentenced to death and his friends sentenced to life for a murder that they did not commit, and eventually they were released. So, I mean, it's always been something that you've been interested in. What was it about Ronald Williamson's story that made you go nonfiction with that one?
Well, you just said it. It was a story. It was a very compelling story, all true. We had a lot of similarities in our lives. Age, race, religion, region of the country, dreams of playing professional baseball, all these things. He was a small town sports hero. I was not. I wanted to be. And the town turned against him one time after a terrible murder, and he had become mentally ill. And the entire town turned against him. The system turned against him. They convicted him with no proof, wrongfully convicted, sent him to death row in Oklahoma, and he came within 5 days of being executed in 1991. They were going to kill him. And the real killer was right there under the very noses of the cops, and they never got him until later. But the fascinating story, and that's when I became just really wrapped up in wrongful convictions and innocence work. I've been doing it now for 15 years, and the stories are so compelling, they need to be told.
Yeah, you were involved I think in a relatively small way, but still involved with the Innocence Project, and you met Jim McCloskey sometime again, I think, prior to your writing The Innocent Man. But he, along with other people who work in this field, are unacknowledged heroes and sometimes misunderstood heroes, not appreciated heroes, and to many Americans, not heroes at all, probably.
Correct. All that's correct. He is a true hero in my book. Jim labored for 45 years, many years by himself, to free the innocent. And there are 72 people who have been exonerated from prison, innocent people, because of Jim McCloskey and Centurion Ministries. And several of those were on death row. But he was a tenacious investigator, and he put together teams of lawyers and experts, and he was just an incredible man. And his legacy is phenomenal because he saved a lot of lives. There are so many innocent people in prison in this country, and there's a big innocence movement to get them out. We've had all these high-profile DNA exonerations over the last 30 years, and people are very suspicious today of what the police and prosecutors say in trials. And so we see fewer, I think, wrongful convictions being passed down by juries, but there's still thousands of innocent people in prison.
And as you say in the introduction to Framed, there were difficulties in that which each of John Grisham and Jim McCloskey write to tell 5 stories of the people who have been exonerated. And the difficulties are which 10 do the two of you choose, and how do you write each of those incredible stories in the 10,000 word limit you set for each of the stories? So how did you go about that?
It was not easy because each story, each wrongful conviction that leads to an exoneration could fill 10 thick books. There's so many pages of testimony and records and on and on and on. And distilling that down to 10,000 words, which is about 30 pages in a book, is an enormous challenge. Most of our stories have already had books written about them and magazine articles and documentary films. And so we had a wealth of information at our fingertips For Jim, it was easier because he had lived the stories. He made the stories happen. He was at the prison when the exonerees walked out of jail after 30 years. He was there, and he was the reason. So the stories were easy for him to tell. They were more difficult for me because I was not there, but I had a lot of information at my fingertips. And how did we choose 10? I don't know. There's so many. We could write hundreds of these stories, and they would all be they have the same elements, but all uniquely different and heartbreaking and compelling. They're just great, great stories.
They are, and they are all different, but there are similarities between them, and much of them have to do with the people who have been wrongfully convicted being the sort of person that society doesn't care much to care about.
Nobody really cares about wrongful convictions in this country, except, of course, for those who are wrongfully convicted, and their families and their friends and the people they know. That's a tiny number of people. Even though there are tens of thousands of innocent people in prison, we have 2.5 million people locked up, which is the highest rate of incarceration in the history of the world. It's insane what we do. It's insane how many of our own people we lock up for minor offenses. But we have so many people in prison, and so many of them are innocent. But again, that's not a big voting block. That's not a. You never hear a politician running for office talk about, well, we've got to get people out of prison. It's just the opposite. We've got to put more people in prison. If you want to get votes, you got to be tough on crime. So it's very difficult work. But again, there are a lot of dedicated innocence advocates and lawyers in this country who are making slow progress.
And I wonder what the ultimate goal is of the book. I mean, essentially, you're a storyteller, and Jim McCloskey is somebody who lives his story and other people's stories. And so there is great value just in having the stories out there to be read and thought about with the readers who pick up the book. But do you have bigger goals for it than that, in the sense of it not shifting society towards a more caring for those wrongfully imprisoned, but just to make a lawmaker somewhere in Texas or Alabama or wherever? What at best do you hope that doing something like Framed can achieve?
Well, it's just a book. It's just a book, and books are not going to bring about wholesale change in anything. Raising awareness. The dream would be for some lawmaker in Texas or Alabama to read the book and have a change of heart and say, wait a minute, we could have a problem here. But to raise awareness, to create enthusiasm for the advocates, to hopefully inspire people to send checks. I wrote a novel called The Guardians about 5 years ago, all fiction, but it featured, I think, to Jim McCloskey. I dedicated the book to Jim McCloskey. It was all about an innocence lawyer in Georgia and the cases he took. And it was all fiction, but it was also all true. And the book generated a lot of money for Centurion. People, Americans are very, very generous, and we support a lot of nonprofits. And the book raised a lot of money. That was not the intent. But with innocence work, there's a direct correlation between the amount of money you have in the bank and how many innocent people you can get out of prison, because it's expensive. It takes about 10 years on the average to exonerate a wrongfully convicted person, and on the rough average ballpark figure, about $300,000. That's money that's all privately raised, as there's no government money involved. So these innocence organizations and advocates have to raise money. They all operate on shoestrings. The more money they have, the more they can litigate, the more experts they can hire, the more people they can free. And so, we'd love to raise a few bucks with the book.
As a book, it succeeds incredibly well, and let's hope that it succeeds in those other more hidden aims as well. John Grisham, thank you very, very much for making some time for us this afternoon. John is co-author, along with Jim McCloskey, of Framed: Astonishing True Stories of Wrongful Convictions.